July is over. What books did I read? Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I'm going to do a wrap-up of every book I finished or DNF'd. There's quite a bit. I am excluding all of the short stories that I read. So what did I read? I'm going to present these books in order of format, and I will begin with print books. Finishing up a book that I should have done for June on the Range was Longarm in the Sandhills by Tabor Evans. This is a naughty Western. A naughty Western is just like a normal Western, except there are a lot of sex chapters in them. And this is what you get in this book. And in this book, Longarm goes out to investigate a murdered, or should I say, missing woman who was a criminal. And if you notice this cover, Longarm is buck naked and carrying a rifle. This scene is depicted in the novel. He is out in the hills with a lady friend. They are doing the naughty thing when a number of riders come up the hill towards them. And of course, Longarm does not want to dismount his lady, so he has to, well, Well, that's the kind of book it is. It's fine for a naughty Western. It's not a great book by any stretch of the imagination, but if you like these naughty Westerns, or cowboy trash, as MJ at Reading This Life prefers to call them, they're a lot of fun. I then finished a physical book that I got from the library. I had to return it. That was Never Flinch by Stephen King. I did do a full review of this book, and I will include it in the description of this video. Needless to say, in the short, if you like the Holly Gibney stories, go ahead and pick up this book, although it's not my favorite of the series. If you do not like the Holly Gibney series, give Never Flinch a pass. I read the Martian Chronicles for Rocket Summer for the 1950s. This is undoubtedly one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written, although calling it a novel is really not fair. It's more of a collection of interconnected short stories describing what life on Mars could be like. I discussed it a bit in my Rocket Summer video. I will also link it. There is also a story in this book that you will not find in current editions, or not all current editions of the Martian Chronicles. I will eventually make a video about that subject. Also for Rocket Summer, the 60s, I read Report on Probability A by Brian W. Aldiss. This is a very experimental novel. It really does not have much of a plot line. It really does not have many characters in any meaningful sense. What you have are three watchers watching this ordinary man and wife, and they're describing what they're doing in pretty minute detail. And then there are watchers watching these watchers reading their report. And someone is watching the watchers. Yes, it is very postmodern, very confusing. I did not like it. It is supposedly a comment on quantum theory, on Schrodinger's cat, that if you have a watcher, that will determine or could determine the outcome of an event. And of course, everything has a watcher. Again, I did not like it very much. The Wounded Age in Eastern Tales by Ferit translated from the Turkish. This is two short novellas, or long short stories, about a Turkish journalist who goes into the mountains to interview the indigenous people up there. It's rather peculiar. Let me show you how this book is written. Essentially, it is written in a poetic style with very short lines, very terse descriptions, but some of it is really rather beautiful. in the descriptions of these remote Turkish mountain people. It's an odd book, though. I liked it, but I didn't like it. It's hard to explain. I felt distant in many cases, like I was a watcher looking on to these events, but having no real connection to them. Although, again, parts of this book are extraordinarily beautiful and poignant, and parts of them at the end almost read like a Stephen Crane poem. Let me give you an example. This short chapter is just called Ruins. The village is in ruins. Everyone killed. Horses, dogs. These people, aren't they afraid of God? I shouted. I waited. My voice did not echo. My God, what sort of place is this? I added. What business would God have on this mountaintop? Said a villager whose name I didn't know. He added, around here we settle our affairs among ourselves. We remained silent. A dog barked in the distance. That's what you get with this book. I really liked it, and I didn't like it. So hard to explain, but pick it up and try it. I am unfamiliar with Turkish literature, and it was a new introduction to me. So that, in its end, was pretty good. I got a head start on Garbogist. I read The Cats by Nick Sharman, originally published in 1977. This is a British killer animal story of a scientist who is working on a virus with cats, and these cats will turn violent if exposed to the heat. And of course, there was a heat wave in England one year, and the cats escaped and went on a rampage near London. As far as killer animal books, this is not a very good one. It was written very much to capitalize on the success of The Rats by Brian Herbert, and The Rats by Brian Herbert probably is the best killer animal book out there. But the cats just did not move me at all. The best thing about this book is it's short, and I finished it rather quickly, and then I could move on to a better book. Now on to the digital books that I read on my Kindle. First was Travels with Charley by John Steinbeck. This is his memoir that he wrote in the 60s of his travels around the country with his dog, Charley, who was a poodle. And he travels all the way across the country. He drives up to Maine, he goes across the country, goes down to California, goes down to the south, and eventually back up to his home in Long Island, New York. This book is listed as a memoir and nonfiction, but I think John Steinbeck exaggerated his travels. He sort of invented stories. Tim O'Brien once said in one of his stories in The Things They Carried, there's this thing called happening truth, and then there is story truth. Happening truth is something that actually is happening in the real world. Story truth is a fictional story that can actually tell the truth almost as well as happening truth. I think a lot of this memoir is story truth and a lot less happening truth, because John Steinbeck does exaggerate. I was looking up on the internet after I finished reading this book, and in this book, John Steinbeck is mostly alone with his dog. In reality, his wife joined him for a lot of these travels, but he sort of edited her out in this story for storytelling purposes. It is a good story. You get to view an America that no longer exists, but in some ways still exists today. Do pick it up. I liked it a bunch. Also, I read East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This was written for the Summer of Steinbeck group, where we're comparing The Grapes of Wrath to East of Eden to discover which is the better of the two novels. And this is the novel that John Steinbeck thought was his magnum opus. It is a story of a family that moves to Salinas, California. It also includes characters called Steinbecks, which are sort of a fictionalized version of his own family. But he wanted to present life in this California town in very biblical terms. It is essentially the retelling of Cain and Abel, but in California. And it is, without doubt, a magnificent American novel. I think everyone should read it. But is it better than The Grapes of Wrath? I mentioned in my Voxer group that I think East of Eden is the better constructed novel. It has more in-depth characters. But The Grapes of Wrath has the gut punch down pat. It is the better of the two, in my humble opinion, but it really only wins by a nose because comparing Grapes of Wrath to East of Eden is comparing apples to oranges. East of Eden is still a great book. It contains one of my favorite characters in literature, Lee, the Chinese servant of the family in East of Eden. What a magnificent character. He also introduces a term that you will have to discover for yourself. Timshul. That alone makes the book worth reading. I also got a head start reading for Garbogast on my Kindle. I finished The Hell Candidate by Graham Masterton. This was a novel he originally published under a pseudonym, Luke Short, in 1980. This novel was to capitalize on the American presidential elections of that year. But in this story, there is a candidate who makes a deal with the devil to win the presidency. And it's not really a very good book. The characters are kind of thin, the plot meanders all over the place, but there are some eerie similarities between his Hell candidate and Donald Trump. So Graham Masterton brought it back out of non-print status, put his own name on it, and let people judge for themselves. I found those similarities really rather fascinating about how easy it is to get people to follow a demagogue. In Graham Masterton's novel, he had the devil's help. But you know something? People don't need the devil's help to follow a demagogue. And that was the scariest part of this book. The only thing that was totally unbelievable, at least in my part, would be, in today's modern society, the devil would have nothing to do with Donald Trump. He would not trust him to make a deal with that man. I read a dark romance, Lights Out by Navessa Allen. I did do a review video of this book. I will link it in the description. This is a very naughty book, very sexually explicit, way out of my wheelhouse, but I kind of liked it anyway. I read White Arrest by Ken Bruen, originally published in 1997. This is a British crime thriller by an Irish author. Now, a white arrest in the UK slang, as I understand it, is the big arrest, the career-making arrest that will raise up a policeman in status and career-wise. A big bust is how I'd probably say it in US terms. But this book just did not engage me at all. Ken Bruen has a very fast, clipped storytelling style, and he did not bring me into the story well enough. And again, I was very glad when this crime novel was over. And now on to the audiobooks that I listened to. First was Slan by A.E. Van Vogt, also for Rocket Summer. I will link to my video description where I give more detail on this book. But it is the story of mutants trying to gain acceptance from regular humanity. It was actually pretty good. I listened to Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present by Ruth Ben-Ghait. This is a non-fiction account describing the strongmen from the beginnings of the 20th century to present day. It starts with characters such as Mussolini, Hitler, Pinochet, and some African leaders, and does include a lot of Donald Trump. These are how men gain power in countries, how they sway people over to vote for them. It is done basically thematically on the different ways strong men can gain power. So the chapters mix on how these people will fool the people into voting for them and how they try to remain in power. I think it is a fairly good introduction to strongmen. It is not an overly detailed history. Some of these books can get rather mired in the minutiae of detail, but I don't need the detail. I need the big picture of the strongman, and this is where this nonfiction book really comes through. I get a picture across this 20th century, in the early years and into present, how people will vote and accept strong men as leaders of their country. And also why we should reject the strongman principle, that we do want a powerful and vibrant democracy. We don't want one man calling the shots. Tower 57 by Drew Platt. This may not actually be a book. This may be more of a radio play or an audio play. It is the story of a radio station out somewhere in the desert. It is the radio's announcer's story of his earlier career, where he was just an intern at a radio station. And these radio stations deal with the wackadoos, the call-ins that are always wondering what's out there. They talk a lot about aliens visiting and other conspiracy theories. Now, this story goes way off the deep end as sort of what you would expect that the listeners of these tiny radio stations out in the middle of the desert might be listening to. But it's not just people in the desert. It is all across the country. But it's a call-in radio station. The wackadoos listening, talking about their conspiracy theories. In many ways, this book was a lot of fun, even though it goes off way into the deep end of total unbelievability. And it was done in multiple voices, because you have certain characters at this radio station, and each character had a different narrator. And that really worked. They made it sound like a radio play. Is it a book? Yeah, I'm counting it as a book. But is it really a book? Well, maybe not. But it was a fun story, even if totally unbelievable. I'm holding up the physical copy of this book, but I did listen to the audiobook. It is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. I did do a fuller review in a different video. It will also be linked in the description. This is the story of a small town in Britain who are visited by something, and all the women become mysteriously pregnant, and all the children may not be normal children. Now, John Wyndham is a master of the understated science fiction story. What a great book. Mississippi Blood by Greg Iles, the third book in the Natchez Burning trilogy. You really should not attempt to read Mississippi Burning without reading Natchez Burning and The Bone Tree first, because it is just a continuation of the story told in those two novels, and I think most readers will be lost, but it is a story of racism in the Deep South and the secrets that people keep to try to keep that racism under the blanket. This was written in the 1910s, somewhere around there. So I don't know if it'd be fully apropos nowadays that this blanket has been taken off and that racism is out of the dark and open. But still, Greg Iles can tell a very good, thrilling story. I do recommend this Natchez Burning trilogy. Again, I am holding up a physical copy of this book, but I did listen to the audiobook. This is By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult. This is a novel told in two storylines. The first storyline is modern-day New York City. There is a young woman who wants to be a playwright. She discovers that she is related to this woman named Amelia Bassano. Amelia Bassano may be the author of some of Shakespeare's plays. So this young playwright writes her play about this woman. And she gets it accepted to a workshop that's going to produce it. But there is this confusion. It gets submitted under a different name, the name of a man, and they accept the play because they think it is written by a man, a gay black man. Hilarity ensues afterwards. And I use that hilarity ensues rather sarcastically. This storyline failed in many aspects because it relies on some of the romantic tropes. Because the man she submits the play to thinks the gay man has written the play, and the main character, the female, is his assistant, and he falls in love with her, thinking that she is the assistant of the author of the play. Hilarity again ensues, especially when I won't tell you more details about that, but not a good storyline. The second storyline is about Amelia Bassano. She was a real woman who actually published the first book of poetry written by a woman. That's pretty impressive in and of itself. But Amelia Bassano wants to be a playwright, and in this time in England, women were not allowed to be playwrights. So she goes to William Shakespeare and gives him her plays to publish under his name. And in this storyline, William Shakespeare is also buying plays from other people, not just Amelia, which sort of accounts for the disparity between his plays, not all the same author. Now, I know a lot of people don't buy this anti-Stratfarian theory. They say, of course, William Shakespeare was the author of the William Shakespeare plays. But I have my doubts, and maybe I'll do a video on my doubts. Now, would Amelia Bassano actually be the author of some of William Shakespeare's plays? I don't know. But that part of the book was really good, or good enough to keep me going. When I have the discussion with my in-person book group, because that's what I read it for, I think we will have a lot to discuss. Second story, pretty good, about Amelia, the historical figure. The story about the New York City playwright, again, not so good. I listened to A Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. This is the third in the trilogy of the Wolf's Den series of books. Again, you cannot pick up A Temple for Fortuna and read it by itself. You do have to read the first two books, which is The Wolf's Den and A House with a Golden Door, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this is a historical novel set in Pompeii. The Temple of Fortune begins on 79 AD, September. If you know your history, you know very shortly what is going to be happening to Pompeii. And what happens to Pompeii is this big gorilla lurking in the back of all three books, because you know what happens to Pompeii. But you get involved with this woman, the main character, named Amelia. She started off in the first book, Wolf's Den, as a prostitute in a brothel, but she's working her way up into Roman society, become a free woman of status. And it's a pretty good history. I did enjoy Amelia's story, how a woman with no power can raise and get some power of her own. But again, we have this 600-pound gorilla of Pompeii, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, lurking. Now, when Mount Vesuvius erupts in this book, and it's not a spoiler, you know this was coming from page 1 of The Wolf's Den, the author does something unexpected. Did I like her unexpected twist to this Pompeii story? It was not what I wanted when I picked up the book, but it was pretty good, or good enough. As a whole, I think people should pick up The Wolf's Den by Elodie Harper, the first book in this trilogy. And if you like it, continue on to the second and third books. I'm glad I finished the trilogy. I had one DNF this month. This is The Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. For the third time, I am holding up a physical copy of the book, but I did try this as an audiobook. Some books do very well as audiobooks. As you noticed, I listen to a lot every month. But the audiobook of Lord of Life did not capture me. I don't think it was the fault of the narrator. I think it is the storytelling style of this book. That this is a story told in the far future. Something has happened to the earth, and humanity has become something not what it once was. They are now imitating the gods of Hindu mythology. Roger Zelazny does not give you any guiding hands about what's happening. You have to discover for yourself, on the page or in your ears, what it actually means when he's describing or telling a scene. And for an audiobook, I don't think that works very well. Now, this is a very famous science fiction novel. I know that Richard at Vintage FS read the physical copy this month as well. He also had problems with this book. So I'm going to give it another shot, and I'm just going to say that the audiobook version did not work for me. Okay, those are all the books that I read in July. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.